support on aviation. It is another good fun. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope everyone enjoyed their lunch. We're on the home straight for the afternoon session of day 2. Before we wrap, we're going to have a really good discussion in an hour or so around the role of nature in achieving net zero. But before that, we've got 2 people who are going to give us a brilliant in-discussion with session. You'll need no introduction to the CBI's President, Lord Karan, who is going to be hosting this next session. But I'm also really pleased to welcome Javier Echave from Heathrow Airport, who is going to be sort of outlining an industry that I think is completely at the heart of this whole debate and the key to sort of success. If we get your industry right, Javier, I think we're really, really on the road to success. So with that, Karen, Javier, please join me on the stage and we'll get going.
Thank you.
Right, good afternoon, everyone. This is a session I've really been looking forward to. And Javier, thank you very much for coming and joining us today, the CFO of Heathrow Airport, of Heathrow. And at the outset, I've worked very, very closely with John Holland-Kaye, your chief executive, throughout the pandemic. And we fought very, very hard. I'm very proud of the role the CBI played in getting huge amounts of government support for industry across the board. We succeeded hugely. I mean, with the furlough scheme, we worked closely with the government for that, with lateral flow testing, with government guaranteed loans. At every stage, we were at the heart of it, fighting for business. But the one area in which we did not succeed was getting help for the aviation industry. We tried our very best, but the government just did not listen. So you win most of the time, but not all the time. And Javier has very kindly said that he will be open and frank and talk about what has happened during the pandemic, the challenges and the way forward, as well as, of course, the whole net zero aspect of it. We will also be talking about the third runway at Heathrow. That has been a topic that's been going on and on for many, many years. And a former Director General of the CBI, Sir Howard Davies, produced his report. I remember sitting next to him at the proms the day he produced the report. It was published. And he said, let's see when it's implemented. Well, we're still waiting. So aviation is one of the greatest success stories of this country. We've been pioneers throughout. I declare my interest, as I would say, in the House of Lords, in that I'm a serving honorary group captain in the Royal Air Force in 601 Squadron. And the aviation sector is worth almost 100 billion pounds, and directly and indirectly employing over 1 million people, 1.3 million people, and 64%, almost 2/3 of business leaders see aviation as key to future prospects. And we're all totally reliant on it. And of course, as I said earlier, it is one of the sectors that was the most badly affected during the pandemic. I mean, it literally came to shut down. My industry with Cobra Beer and the hospitality industry, we suffered hugely. We had restaurants in lockdown and closed. So I know the feeling, but if any industry suffered more than others, it is the aviation industry. So thank you. And if I can ask you the first, we're going to have a discussion and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. What about this pandemic, the challenges you face and what you're facing now?
Well, thank you, Karen, for inviting me. Obviously, it's fantastic to see all of you here because that's a signal that actually we are allowed to meet again, we are allowed to do business again, we are allowed to fly again, and it's absolutely fantastic to see that. Obviously, the last 3 years has been terrible for us, has been absolutely catastrophic. I think the level of losses that we have seen in the aviation industry has been extraordinary. As of today, which last month actually was the first month in the last 2 years that I have posted profits in my P&L, which is a not very It's not great for my CV, I have to say, but it's the first month in 2 years that we have posted profits, because it has been absolutely devastated. 4 billion pounds of losses. I think at the start of the pandemic, we were losing 8 million pounds a day. And obviously that's catastrophic when you have so many companies that you are trying to enable. The magic of Heathrow every single day is delivered by 400 organizations, providing more than 75,000 jobs, and actually enabling many of the members of the CBI to really carry on with your business. So it was very catastrophic, very difficult choices to make, because obviously Heathrow is a private organization, but we have a national critical role to play. We are the gateway connecting Britain sustainably with the rest of the world. And therefore there are things that we were very clear from the first day, when suddenly we realized that traffic was collapsing by 98%, that we have a role to play. Obviously, we had to protect first and foremost the safety of passengers and colleagues working at the airport. And one of the things we are more proud is the role that our team has played during the pandemic. And Karen, you have been extraordinary in terms of helping, in terms of the government creating the right global health mandates to really enable that, because obviously the first days of the pandemic, the first thing was making sure that everyone was feeling safe. But also I think making sure that we were playing our national role. Heathrow is not only the only hub airport in the largest aviation market in the world, we are also the largest port. 35% of the exports of the country comes from Heathrow in the belly of their aircraft. And therefore, we were very clear that despite being a private organization, we have a fundamental role to play in terms of enabling that. Obviously, we have been working very closely with the CBI and with the government to try to get support. The reality is that we haven't got much support. I think the total support that we have received in the last 2 years has been around 70 million pounds, which is a lot of money. But actually, when you are facing 8 million pounds losses a day, is like an Easter holiday.
So your cumulative losses for these 2 years was
4 billion.
4 billion, and you received 70 million pounds of help.
Yes.
And business rates, we got a lot of business rates help for industry, including the hospitality industry. In your case, your rates are what, 100 million a year?
120.
120 million.
121.3.
Rates, business rates, and you didn't get any help?
No, we have received around 12 million pounds in total, which of the 242 million pounds obviously has been a painful reality when actually your business has been constrained primarily by government policy closing borders. So obviously we have tried to be, and we have been collaborative with the government, because obviously the government has had many difficult choices to make. I'm very empathetic with the Chancellor. He is the big CFO of the country, and therefore I know how difficult it is to manage a budget. But the reality is that the support that we have received in the last 2 years hasn't been much. Having said that, I think that what we are now working with the government is to how they can support the next chapter. And I think the next chapter is about really winning the recovery. And today is really about decarbonizing aviation. I'm sure we will discuss in the next few minutes. But this is a role that the government can help us, because we are decarbonizing aviation, but we are not decarbonizing aviation as quickly as we would like. So we will continue working with the government. It's true that they haven't been extremely supportive in the last 2 years. It's great, though, that in March this year, I think that the UK government was leading in terms of opening borders and opening trade. So I think that this is very much what we would like to continue working with the government going forward in terms of how we can enable business. Because at the end of the day, Heathrow is not an airport. Heathrow is a service infrastructure business. And a service is delivered by people, for your businesses. Our ultimate purpose is really providing that great service so you can enable you to really provide the great trade that you bring to this exceptional country.
Great, well, thank you. Just before, we're going to move on to asking specifically about Jet Zero, about contracts, the differences.
Yep.
But on this government help, I was speaking to the general manager of one of the leading European airlines, one of the biggest airlines in the world for the whole of the UK. And he said, well, all your problems at your airport, all your queues and your cancelled flights, your government didn't help you enough. is that in our case, our government has helped carried on a furlough scheme until now. They gave government-guaranteed loans to the aviation sector. We were able to plan 6 months in advance, so we didn't have to make people redundant. You had to make lots of people redundant. Now you have to rehire, take 6 months' notice because you've got to reskill, you've got to get the permissions. We don't have any of those problems, so we don't have any. Your government didn't help you enough.
Completely agree. I think one of the things, obviously, you can get from my accent that I was born in Spain, in Madrid. I have become British after the years. But one of the strong passions that John and I join is our love to the French. And actually, we were saying even the French are supporting their aviation partners more than us. But it's true. I think that there are many other governments. The French is a great example. The German is another great example that they have been extremely helpful. The American government, for example, deployed £50 billion to support aviation on day one because they recognize that aviation is not just about the airport. It's about enabling the economy. And obviously, despite all the losses that we have faced, we have tried to be an extremely responsible business. And I think some of the courageous decisions that we took 2 years ago, I think that are rendering benefits today. So for example, one of the first things that we agreed is that we were not going to make anyone in the front line redundant. I think we did open a generous voluntary severance program, which many colleagues accepted, and that was a good win-win in terms of we trying to control our costs when facing many losses. But actually, we didn't make any compulsory redundancies in the front line. And it's one of the reasons why today we are one of the few airports who are operating smoothly. It's true that we are facing slightly longer queues than we would like, but I think some of the responsible decisions that we took back in 2020 are rendering benefits today. Obviously, many other airports have suffered quite a lot. It's true that in Heathrow, I think we are the only hub in the UK, and it's one of the reasons why airlines decided to consolidate their operations into Heathrow. So other airports in the UK have struggled even more than us because their business in terms of point-to-point location into the UK were completely inexistent. But I think it's definitely completely agree, Karen, that other countries have deployed much more help, and that's why Heathrow for many months, unfortunately, we lost the prime position in terms of hub airports in Europe. But today Heathrow is back. I think with the government really opening borders and the great collaboration that is happening at Heathrow between ourselves, airlines, border force, I think we are back. Heathrow today is leading again in terms of passenger traffics across Europe. And I think some of the responsible decisions that we made in terms of protecting our own colleagues, protecting things like our commitments to the living wage, are rendering benefits, which is helping us to really ramp up more rapidly and more responsibly than other colleagues, unfortunately.
Thank you. And so what are you doing with Jet Zero? What are you doing? And then if you can bring in contracts of differences as well, and just dealing with this whole area of net zero.
Well, I think hopefully you can get, after a few minutes, my passion about aviation. And the reason why I'm passionate about aviation is that I believe that aviation is a force for good. I think what we are here is to really to connect businesses. And actually, when you really look at the Sustainable Development Goals that United Nations has been pushing for a few years now, aviation enables 13 out of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We are extremely passionate about aviation. But also, I think we have to accept the uncomfortable truth that science is showing. I think it's fantastic that we are in the Science Museum, because I think for me, when I came into this door, I think that there are two important things that came to my mind. First of all, it's important that businesses, we read what science is telling us about the impact that we are creating in the planet. And then the second is that it's important we watch the faces of the little human beings walking in this building, because we are responsible of creating the businesses that those little human beings are going to be enjoying in the next generations. So for us, I think the challenge is how can we protect the benefits of aviation in a world free of carbon? Because the enemy is not aviation, the enemy is carbon. And therefore, a few years ago, we implemented our Heathrow 2.0 sustainability strategy, which is very much about accepting the responsibility that we have to take. One of the philosophers that inspired me the most in the last few decades was Ben Parker, also known as the uncle of Spider-Man. And Spider-Man's uncle used to remind his nephew that with great power comes great responsibility. I think at Heathrow we have huge power. We are that gateway of the UK with global growth. We have huge responsibility to play. Although we are not directly responsible of the 21 million tons of CO2 produced by aviation at Heathrow in 2019, we have to really embrace that huge responsibility because the price is enormous. We are clear and science is unequivocal. Yes, aviation is great, but if we don't remove those 21 million tons of CO2 at speed, we run the risk of stop existing as a business because those little human beings walking among us in this building will remind us and will continue facing civil disobedience until we listen them that actually it's not acceptable that we continue with that carbon journey. So the way for us is to really embrace that plan. And our plan has two very clear roles. First of all is getting our own house in order, is removing at least 45% of carbon on the ground, which contributes to around 1 million tons of CO2, and that's primarily coming from passengers coming into the airport, trying to shift them from their cars to public transport, try to increase the number of electric vehicle charges across the airport so we can really decarbonize our fleet. But the elephant in the airport is the 20 million tons of CO2 coming from aircraft burning fossil-based kerosene. And I think that this is where great power with great responsibility comes in. It's true that aircraft and airlines have direct control on that, but it's in our own home where that carbonization is happening. And we are decarbonizing aviation. The mechanism, the plan that we have in place to really decarbonize that is by doing 4 things. First of all is making sure that aircraft are becoming more efficient and airlines are doing an extraordinary job in terms of improving engine efficiencies, as well as traffic control, improving the airspace design. The motorways of the skies were designed 50 years ago and they are not as efficient as they could be on current technology. Second, sustainable aviation fuels is a technology that does exist, is available, is not science fiction, and it reduces CO2 emissions by 70%. Third,
reduces by 70%.
By 70%. And the good thing of SAFs is that apart from existing today, it can be blended with existing jet fuel, which means that you don't have to wait to change aircraft engines. You don't have to wait to change airport pipelines. You can blend with existing.
So what is preventing that from coming online in a big way quicker?
Well, the challenge is that we don't have enough of them. So Heathrow today is the largest consumer of SAFs in the world, and that's coming from a pioneering commercial incentive we implemented at the start of this year, where we contributed to close some of the pricing gaps.
Is it much more expensive?
It's around 6 times more expensive.
6 times more expensive?
Yeah. But it's exactly the same challenge that we have with off-wind technology 2 decades ago. So the challenge for us, Karen, is twofold. One is there's not enough of them, and this is where the government can help creating a mandate on supply, because if the government creates that mandate on supply, that will attract private investment to really generate an extraordinary green industrial revolution opportunity on the back of SAFs. But second is, as we have just discussed, the gap on pricing is still too big. And this is where contract for differences, as they were implemented for offshore wind technology, can help in terms of closing that gap. So we are decarbonizing aviation. We are the largest consumer of SAF. The technology is sound and works, but there's not enough. And I think that this is where the government can help and redeem their sins of not supporting us during COVID.
Thank you. And I'll ask one more question, that I'm going to open it up to the audience. The third runway. Of course, there are people who say, no, that's going to create more emissions, and then you've got lots of objections to it from lots of different reasons and different projects. Is it necessary? I mean, I think yes, but I mean, your opinion. And how and when can it happen, and linked to what we're talking about?
Well, I think the challenge of aviation is decarbonization. It doesn't matter if you have 1, 2, or 3 runways. So for me, I think decarbonization is existential. So I'm more worried about decarbonization for my first and second runway than the third. Because by the time that happens, we would and we will decarbonize aviation. So that's clear. I think legislation is crystal clear. Expansion can only happen if we deliver within within the mandate. And to be honest, the government has already codified legislation net zero by 2050. So the fact that expansion and emissions are linked, in my view, they are not, because it's more around an issue for the first and the second runway. So we will decarbonize aviation, definitely. I think the challenge in terms of expansion, obviously, is, and on the last couple of years, obviously, we have paused expansion because of the amount of losses that we were expecting. And obviously, recovering from this crisis is going to take still a few years. It's going to take a few years because it's true that we are seeing strong pent-up demand, but also we are seeing some structural challenges, just challenges coming from cost of living crisis, GDP deceleration, a war which is eroding confidence in some of the non-European passengers. So all these things will slow down some of the pent-up demand that we have seen, and probably I think post-summer we will see some lower levels of growth. But I think one of the things we have learned from the pandemic is the power of the hub. I think that airlines, despite criticizing some of the discussions that we're having about charges and regulation and all these things, they have consolidated their operation back into the hub because it works for them. I think, and in the big macro economic reality, Global Britain can only happen for having a third runway. I think it doesn't make too much sense to get political freedom from Europe while your supply chain is linked to airport capacity provided by European hubs. Really, I think that the success of Global Britain and really connecting Britain with global growth needs to come from sustainable capacity, and the only place where the UK can really provide that capacity is expansion. So today we have a national policy statement, it's alive, it's true that expansion is paused temporarily, but the second part of the year we are working in terms of the plan how to restart expansion, because expansion will be needed.
Marvelous. Thank you very much. That's all very clear. If you'd like to ask a question, put your hand up. There's one right in the front here. And please, your name and your organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Fascinating. I feel for you. You've clearly been through the mill. My name's Marcus Watson, and I'm a growth stage investor in a company called Hybrid Air Vehicles, Airlander, you might know it. Very good. So it's a company that's looking at sustainable aviation in a very different way. So rather than looking at how can we make fuel more sustainable, is how do we use a hell of a lot less fuel in order to fly. And so the vehicles that they're producing, as you well know, have enormous capacity to be able to take 90 passengers, more than 10 tons, etc. But it's slower. With that comes lower kinetic energy. Therefore, you don't need to have the same kind of security arrangements as you do for fast jets. So my question to you is, when you're looking at decarbonising the aviation industry, it seems to me that you have an opportunity to look at testing new infrastructure systems that would actually enable new types of aircraft with different characteristics, but that immediately today, even on kerosene, are 70% per mile flown more efficient than a traditional narrow-body aircraft. So I'm interested in your views on that.
Thank you, Marcus. Look, I think you're right. I think that to really decarbonize aviation, there's a combination of options that we have to put in place. There's no single bullet to decarbonize aviation. I think that the largest opportunity in the short term is SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, simply because it does exist, is working, and actually has a huge benefit. It can remove carbon significantly. So when you look our plans between now and 2050, SAFs can play around 50% of the reduction in CO2. But there are many other things, as you mentioned, Marcus, that can help. Obviously, first of all, is we are contributing in terms of research and exploring new technologies. Hydrogen will have a huge role to play in next decade. We will see more short-haul commercial flights using green hydrogen. There's a question around how it's going to be produced, what's going to be the cost of operating that, what's the cost of investment in terms of transporting liquid hydrogen into airports. Electricity and batteries, I think, have a huge role to play in the next few decades. So I think it's really important, and I think that this is where leadership, I think, has a role to play. We have to, and I'm going to quote Karen on this. Karen is a very inspiring leader, as you well know, but one of the things I have been inspired more recently by him is by his quote of, we have to be ambitious, but we have to remain humble. So we have to be ambitious. And I think we have to have ambitious plans. And those ambitious plans is recognizing that this is not something that can happen overnight, because we have to bring passengers with us. We have to make sure that that transition into sustainable energy is also affordable for them. But we have to remain open-minded, we have to remain humble, we have to remain ambitious, and really incorporate all these different tools and play with them when it becomes affordable for consumers to pay for them. So definitely something that we are looking. I think the question is, when is the right time to sequence that? And as Marcus says, is now.
Thank you. Great question, super answer. And what you've hit on as a theme throughout this conference is this challenge of transition. That we all want to get there quickly. The solutions are there, but how do we get there in a way that's affordable and we take people with us without going backwards?
Exactly.
So thank you very much. Is there another question somewhere? Okay, the two here, two hands here, one and one, yeah. Thank you.
Hi, hello, my name is Jack from UK Finance, and aviation, much like agriculture, is a big area which presents many challenges. So I was just wondering, what are the key challenges you find moving forward, and what, if anything, can government do to de-risk sort of finance's role in really opening up and decarbonising the sector?
Thank you, Jack. I think I see many opportunities going forward. And I think it's a matter of mindset in terms of trying to really shape those challenges into opportunities. Karen introduced me, I'm a CFO, I'm a very proud accountant, and I believe that accountants will be the ones decarbonizing this world. And the reason for that is because, discuss exactly. Yeah. The reason for that is because today, financial markets are struggling to price accurately carbon risk. As soon as we help financial markets to price accurately carbon risk, financial markets, in my view, will play their magic. Capital will be better allocated, innovative technological solutions will be properly funded, and therefore the transition is going to be accelerated. So one of the roles that we have to play, corporates, is rather than waiting to legislators to provide data to the market, we can adopt today TCFD, we can adopt TNFD, we can support the international sustainability standard boards to incorporate those standards into our financial statements, because all of that is going to help markets have the right data to price carbon risk more accurately and play its magic in terms of attracting private investment to accelerate the transition.
So carbon pricing, you think, is absolutely key going forward?
I think it is. I think in terms of really helping investors to address what's the cost of carbon for businesses. And I think it's going to create uncomfortable questions. But look, we wouldn't be here if we were not slightly uncomfortable. So I think we have to embrace with ambition that short-term discomfort, because the price is really important. The price is about securing that those little human beings walking in this building today can continue enjoying the benefits of aviation when they have the age to travel alone.
Fantastic, thank you. I think we've got time for one more question, that right in front here. Thank you.
Hello, Martin Hawley. I've worked in the aviation industry over 25 years, and I'm the co-founder of a climate tech company in aviation. I think one of the things I think we can put more attention in the UK and elsewhere is the operational improvements. And there's something like between 5 and 10% improvement in efficiency that we could implement by 2025. I mean, that would be an aggressive plan. And I just wonder, what you think about, Jet Zero is putting, big numbers of money, 100 million, into technologies of the future. But how can we get some more investment in the now?
Well, I think I'll back to SAFs. I think we are using SAFs, but we don't have enough. So I think the more we can, the government can help in terms of creating that mandate on supply, that contract for differences, we can really scale that up. Because I think if there's something that is really critical, is that we deploy the technologies that can remove carbon today rather than continue waiting for theoretical technologies of the future, that they will come. But one of the things that science continues reminding us and the IPCC continues reminding us is that we're already late. And therefore, the quicker we can really scale up our action, the better.
Can I just come back on that quickly?
Very quickly, we're out of time. Thank you.
10% SAF by 2030. I'm saying you could be really increasing efficiency right now by 2025. So you'd have a 5-year push on that. So that's where I'm at. Not about SAFs, etc. So maybe we could chat afterwards.
Completely. I think continuous improvement in terms of efficiency of aircraft, I think, is needed. Airspace modernization, I think, is needed. There are many operational practices, and this is where collaboration among businesses is so fundamental. No organization has a single bullet. But the reality is that 50% of the UK jet fuels is being consumed at Heathrow. If we fix Heathrow, we fix aviation. If we fix aviation, there are no excuses to decarbonize any other sector. So I think I will call out for really collaboration to really continue our endeavors to decarbonizing all of our businesses as soon as possible.
Thank you. Javier, Echave, that has been absolutely amazing how much we packed into half an hour there. We could have carried on discussing for hours, but just huge thanks to you.
Thank you.
And the collaboration point that you ended on has been key throughout. We started off with the session, we're talking about the massive losses, 4 billion that you've lost, and yet here you are, you've made a profit now this last month. The importance of Heathrow, 35% of our exports, and the decarbonisation of aviation, you've been absolutely clear about that, and 13 out of the 17 SDGs. And you said the enemy is not aviation, the enemy is carbon. And that's, I think, a really important message. And with great power comes great responsibility. 21 million tons that you have to deal with, and 20 million of that is aircraft fuel. You talked about sustainable aviation fuels. Stark facts, 70% reduction, but it's 6 times more expensive. So here's the challenge. Contracts for differences is going to be absolutely important. The third runway, we've spoken about that, about expansion and emissions. And then you've also been very clear about the challenges that face us, your industry, our country, our economy, cost of living, war, GDP deceleration, and the importance of your hub and sustainable capacity. And we've had fantastic questions. Thank you very much. And here, to summarize, you said that looking ahead to net zero by 2050, 50% of that will come from sustainable aviation fuels. But the rest of it is about technology, hydrogen, electricity, batteries, and being ambitious. So this transition is a very important point that you've made. And I'm going to finish with these couple of quotes of yours. Accountants will be the ones that will decarbonize the world. And as a chartered accountant, I was very happy to hear that. And also, you talked about carbon pricing so frankly, and how it's uncomfortable questions. And that is what this conference is all about. But wow, what a great session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Marvelous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen, Javier, what a great session indeed. Really, really good. Right, everyone, stay in your seats for just 2 minutes. We're going to do a quick set change, a quick switch over of microphones, and then our final panel debate is all about the role of nature in achieving net zero. Bear with us, we'll be back in 2.